This clause will shift all legal liability. If you sign here, your company will bear every risk." The boardroom went instantly deathly quiet. Emma Carter's words hung in the air like a mallet poised to strike. The 16-year-old stood at the glass threshold of the executive conference room on the top floor of Harper Enterprises, her scuffed sneakers and a janitor's badge dangling from her neck betraying her humble station, completely at odds with the atmosphere of authority in that room. Emma pointed directly at the contract that CEO Thomas Harper had nearly signed. His fine fountain pen hovered mid-air above the page, not yet touching ink to paper. His salt and pepper brows knitted together in puzzled suspicion, as though he were trying to decipher the real meaning behind this unexpected warning from the strange young woman before him. Beside him, his wife, Karen Harper, blinked rapidly, struggling to conceal both irritation and astonishment at this unprecedented interruption. Across the table, Brian Miller, Thomas's longtime partner, ever composed with his confident smile, forced out a mocking laugh that sounded painfully contrived. "What did you just say?" Brian asked, his tone unnervingly calm and controlled, as if trying to force the tension back into its box. Emma took a steady breath, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the CEO in measured, persuasive tones. "I've studied that clause very carefully, on page 22 of this agreement. It transfers all legal responsibility for the merger onto Harper Enterprises. If anything happens after signing, fraud, litigation, bankruptcy, your company will shoulder every consequence. Meanwhile, your partner walks away completely unscathed." The younger executives seated around the table exchanged alarmed looks. One of them abruptly pulled the contract toward him and flipped to page 22. Another fumbled for his tablet, as if to verify her claims on the spot. Karen leaned forward, her eyes ice cold, her voice laced with sarcasm and displeasure. "This little girl doesn't even belong here. She's just the janitor's daughter," a quiet voice at the far end of the table murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. But Emma stood firm, unshaken by the disdain. She knew exactly where she stood, and understood full well the repercussions her words might bring upon herself and her family. Yet deep inside, Emma knew that if she remained silent now, she would betray her conscience, and all the values her mother had instilled in her over the years. The next morning, as the first rays of sunrise bathed the Harper Enterprises building in light, Emma Carter realized she faced the most important decision of her life. A decision that could upend everything, from the peaceful life she and her mother knew to the future of one of Chicago's largest corporations. But deep in her heart, she already knew which path she would take. Because doing what's right never depends on your job, your status, or your background. It simply has to be done. The tormenting thoughts that had kept Emma up all night made her heart pound so fiercely as she stood outside the conference room door that she was sure it might burst right out of her chest at any moment. Through the narrow glass panel, she could see Thomas Harper sitting upright at the head of the table, surrounded by powerful men and women whose faces were tense and stern. In one hand, he held a gleaming gold fountain pen. In the other, he gripped the stack of documents Emma had studied the night before. Emma drew a deep breath. Her palms were damp with nerves. She knew all too well that crossing this threshold meant accepting enormous risk. Not only could she lose her job, but her mother might face serious trouble too. Yet, deep inside, the small girl understood that remaining silent in the face of wrongdoing was far more terrifying than any consequence she might endure. She eased the door open, the soft creak echoing in the cavernous silence of the room, and every pair of eyes swung to look at her. The sudden appearance of the young girl in her plain janitorial uniform, standing against the backdrop of luxury attire and corporate authority, plunged the room into an atmosphere thick with suspicion and discomfort. "What is it?" Thomas asked, his low voice laced with curiosity and palpable embarrassment. Emma swallowed hard. Her hand trembled, but her voice rang out clear and resolute. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Harper, but I have something very important to tell you." Skeptical, scornful looks began to appear, especially from Karen Harper, Thomas's wife, whose sharp features and fashionable cropped blonde hair made her presence as intimidating as her glare. Seated beside her, Brian Miller, an influential partner with a cold, steely gaze, cut in abruptly, his tone dripping contempt. "Who are you? And how did you get in here during our meeting?" Emma took a small step back, yet her eyes remained fixed on Thomas. "I'm Emma Carter, the custodian on the 30th floor. Please don't sign that contract yet. There's a dangerous clause I believe you haven't noticed." Thomas froze. The pen in his hand hovered midair. The room seemed to freeze with him. "You're Emma, right?" Karen said, her voice overly sweet yet laced with annoyance. "Do you even realize who you're speaking to? Our top legal team has already reviewed this thoroughly." Emma didn't flinch, though she could feel the iciness of Karen's stare. "I know that, Mrs. Harper, but I've read it too. Clause 14, Section C makes Harper Enterprises legally and financially responsible for any issues arising after the merger. It's cleverly worded to mislead." Thomas's expression shifted to serious concern. He shot a quick look at Karen, then Brian. Brian offered a confident, mocking chuckle. "Thomas, are you really going to trust a cleaning girl over our seasoned lawyers? Ridiculous." A few in the room chuckled to ease the tension, but Thomas remained silent, hesitation plain on his face. Emma's heart still racing, she pressed on more boldly. "I'm just a custodian. I'm not a lawyer. But I can read, and I understand what will happen if you sign this. Please, check it again before it's too late." Her words fell into stunned silence. A young female attorney quickly rifled through her papers, her indifferent gaze snapping to intense focus as she landed on the clause Emma had mentioned. "Jessica, is there a problem?" Thomas asked sharply. Jessica hesitated, then nodded, her voice trembling. She's right. This clause is extremely dangerous for us, sir." Karen's face went pale. Her forced smile vanished. Brian sat up straighter, anger flashing in his eyes. "This is absurd!" Brian exploded, but Thomas raised a hand to silence him, his own face transitioning from surprise to anger. "That's enough. I want to put the signing on hold and review everything thoroughly," he declared. His gaze settled on Emma, the small custodian standing vulnerably at the doorway. In that moment, he no longer saw a cleaning girl but a courageous young woman who had stepped out of the shadows to speak the truth. Emma felt a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, tempered by the blatant hatred still burning in Karen's and Brian's stares. Those two whose nefarious scheme had been exposed for all to see. Emma exhaled a long, steady breath. She knew she'd stepped across a dangerous line, but inside she felt both relief and pride. At least for now, she had done the right thing, whatever might come next. The icy glares and vicious whispers from everyone in the boardroom crashed over Emma like a tidal wave, trying to shove her backward. Standing in that vast chamber of power, she could feel their contempt, but she held her ground, feet planted firmly on the plush carpet, eyes locked straight ahead, never once bowing. A sharp, female voice cut through the tense silence. "Thomas, this is unacceptable. You're really going to trust a minor with zero legal experience over the $1 million law firm we hired?" Karen Harper rose, her tailored business dress hugging her slim frame, blonde hair shimmering as she spoke with commanding authority, though beneath her composed exterior, raw anger simmered. Beside her, Brian Miller, the powerful partner with steely eyes, lounged confidently in his chair. "Don't you find it odd, Karen?" Thomas said slowly, shifting his gaze from Emma to his wife. His tone was calm, but suspicion lined every word. "How could such a dangerous clause slip past our legal team's rigorous review?" Brian chuckled lightly, leaning back. His cold stare locked onto Thomas with barely concealed irritation. "Thomas, it's simple," he said, brimming with self-assurance. "This girl probably skimmed a few words online and misunderstood. We can't derail a critical deal over an unsubstantiated claim from a janitor's kid." Emma clenched her small fists, summoning every ounce of courage as she spoke clearly and firmly. "Mr. Miller, I'm not mistaken. This clause explicitly states that if any dispute or lawsuit arises after signing, Harper Enterprises bears all legal liability and financial losses, even if the other party is entirely at fault." Taking a small step forward, she grabbed the contract from the table, flipped to the key page, and held it out to Thomas with unwavering resolve, her eyes shining with rare bravery. "If you don't believe me, read it yourself right here. The language is intentionally obscured, but the meaning is crystal clear." Thomas stared deeply into Emma's eyes before lowering his gaze to the highlighted text. His face shifted from doubt to alarm as he realized she was absolutely right. His heart pounded as the truth sank in. "This is a real problem," he murmured. Karen immediately interrupted, her voice still sweet but ice-cold at its core. "Darling, it must be a minor oversight. Brian and I reviewed this contract thoroughly. How could we have missed something so critical?" Brian nodded, eyes never leaving Thomas, as if pressing him to decide quickly. "If you're this suspicious, Thomas, we could lose our best opportunity in years. Do you really want to risk that?" Thomas looked up at Brian, a deeper doubt flickering across his face for the first time. Brian's calm perfection now seemed contrived, as if every word had been pre-rehearsed. Thomas frowned, uneasy with the two people he'd always trusted most. Emma stood beside him, reading the inner conflict on the powerful CEO's face. She knew the truth could hurt, but hiding it would be far worse. She inhaled deeply, her voice steady yet resolute. "I know I'm just the janitor. But because I'm not someone important, I can see what many important people overlook. Please trust me this once." A profound silence fell. Thomas slowly set his pen down, burdened with the weight of what he'd learned. He rose, surveying everyone in the room before finally looking back at Emma. "Thank you, Emma. I've decided not to sign this contract. We'll review it thoroughly again." Brian's brow tightened in displeasure. Karen went nearly pale, her eyes flashing cold fury when they passed over Emma. Thomas gently picked up the document and handed it to Jessica. "Jessica, I need you and the legal team to re-examine this contract carefully. Report back to me within 24 hours. Jessica nodded briskly. "Yes, Mr. Harper." Turning to Emma, Thomas's voice grew warm and sincere. "I owe you my thanks, Emma." Emma allowed herself a small, relieved smile, though the hostile stares from Brian and Karen still left her uneasy. She knew from this moment on she had become a thorn in the side of the most powerful people in the room. But she also understood one thing very clearly. The truth, no matter how painful, was always worth defending. The moment Thomas finished speaking, the oppressive tension in the boardroom seemed to lift slightly, but Brian Miller's and Karen Harper's glacial stares remained locked on Emma. Before she could even exhale, she heard hurried footsteps echoing down the corridor, followed by two security guards wearing solemn expressions. "Emma Carter, is it?" one of them said, his voice cold and clipped. "You'll come with us now." Emma started, as if doused with a bucket of ice water. Her eyes flew to Thomas, who still stood there looking momentarily taken aback. Before he could react, Brian cut in harshly, a sneer twisting his lips. "Thank you, gentlemen. This girl has intruded into an executive meeting without any valid reason. That's a serious breach of company security protocol." Emma's voice trembled as she tried to protest. "I didn't intrude. I only came to warn Mr. Harper about the contract." Brian's eyes glittered with contempt as he snapped, "Enough, Emma. We've heard all your fabrications. Let the security team handle her." Desperate, Emma cast one last glance at Thomas, silently pleading for his support, but he remained lost in thought, neither intervening nor defending her. Karen's lips curved into a satisfied, triumphant smile as she stood by her husband, her presence affirming their authority. The two guards moved in without offering Emma any chance to explain further, escorting her politely but firmly out of the room. In the cold indifference of those in power, Emma felt nothing but disdain and contempt. Stepping into the hallway, Emma's legs felt weightless, her chest constricted by the sting of injustice and anger. But the real pain hit when she spotted her mother, Sophia Carter, standing dazed at the reception desk. Beside her stood an HR representative, her face impassive and stern. "Sophia Carter," the woman announced, voice unyielding. "The company must suspend you indefinitely, pending a complete investigation of today's events." Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Emma. Confusion and disappointment etched across her features. "Emma, what have you done?" Emma stumbled forward, her voice caught in her throat. "Mom, I was only trying to warn Mr. Harper about a dangerous clause in the contract. I never meant for it to go this far." Sophia shook her head slowly, her tone trembling with reproach. "Emma, do you realize you've just cost us our only source of income? How are we supposed to live now? Why would you act so recklessly?" Emma felt her heart constrict at her mother's words, more painful than any contemptuous glare she had faced in that boardroom. She fell silent, tears spilling down her cheeks, filled with guilt and helpless regret. In the days that followed, the small apartment Emma and her mother shared felt darker and more oppressive than ever. Rent and utility bills piled up on the kitchen table like harsh reminders that they had no income. Meals grew meager, sometimes nothing more than stale bread and water. Every time Emma stepped through the door, she found her mother sitting by the window, staring blankly at the street below. Sophia's usual spark was gone, replaced by exhaustion and deep worry. One late afternoon, as the crimson sunset filtered through the tiny window, Emma approached her mother and whispered with remorse, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I only wanted to do the right thing. I didn't expect things to turn out this badly." Sophia turned to her daughter, her eyes softening briefly but still heavy with fatigue. "I know you meant well, Emma. But life doesn't always let us follow our hearts. We're not rich or powerful people who can afford the consequences of such risks. One small decision from you has upended our entire world." Emma bowed her head, silent tears tracing down her cheeks. "I know, but I couldn't stand by and watch someone make a terrible mistake. I don't regret what I did, only that I've caused you pain." Sophia sighed and gently laid her hand on Emma's shoulder, offering what comfort she could even as she felt lost herself. She didn't blame Emma entirely, yet she had no idea how to claw their way out of this mess. Outside the window, darkness crept over the city, casting the mother and daughter's cramped apartment into deeper shadow. Emma sat beside her mother, her heart heavy with unanswerable questions. was standing up for the truth worth such a steep price. Despite everything, she knew there was no turning back. Ahead lay nothing but hardship and challenge, but she still believed, deep down, that the truth, costly as it might be, was always worth defending. While Emma and her mother endured bleak days as a consequence of Emma's brave stand, up on the top floor of Harper Enterprises, Thomas Harper found himself haunted by relentless thoughts. The image of that determined, courageous young girl kept spinning through his mind, stirring a persistent unease in his heart. He sat in silence at his expansive desk, poring over the contract Emma had pointed out. Every line seemed clearer now, the subtle, deceptive clauses revealed in stark detail, so cleverly written they could fool even the most seasoned professionals. Thomas wondered how many times he had hurriedly signed agreements in the past without spotting similar traps. His finger hovered over his computer screen as he scrolled through recent company transactions. A suspicious pattern stood out. In the past few weeks, substantial sums had quietly moved into offshore accounts. Accounts he'd never heard mentioned in any internal meeting. A frown creased Thomas's brow as his unease deepened. Tracing the money's path, he saw all transfers originated from internal accounts directly overseen by his wife, Karen, and his longtime partner, Brian Miller. Two people he had always trusted without question. Thomas drew a deep breath, his chest tightening at the doubts he never wanted to face. How could he even suspect Karen, his wife of more than 20 years, or Brian, the friend who had stood by him through every career, high and low? Yet the evidence before him was undeniable. The office door swung open softly, yanking him from his chaotic thoughts. Karen entered, looking as composed and confident as ever, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. Her voice was light, as if nothing were amiss. "Still reviewing that contract, Thomas. I thought we agreed it was just a minor misunderstanding." Thomas forced his face into calm neutrality, though his tone carried a rare chill. "Karen, I found some irregular transactions in the company accounts. Do you know anything about this?" For a fleeting moment, a flicker of surprise crossed Karen's sharp eyes. She quickly masked it with a serene smile. "Irregular? What do you mean? It's probably just project expenses for our international ventures. You know, Brian handles our overseas investments." Thomas said nothing, studying every micro-expression on Karen's face. He noticed her composure felt unusually practiced, too perfect, too calculated, as if she'd rehearsed her response in advance. "Who drafted this contract?" he asked, his voice firmer, prompting Karen to hesitate ever so slightly. "Our legal department, of course," Karen replied swiftly, her tone still silky and persuasive. "And Brian helped a great deal." "So why did our lawyers miss such a dangerous clause?" Thomas pressed, his eyes locked on his wife. "It's hard to believe a clause that severe slipped past our top experts." Karen paused for a heartbeat before regaining her confidence, her voice turning icier. "Thomas, what are you implying? You can't actually suspect Brian and me, can you?" Thomas watched her for a long moment, remaining silent. The pause unsettled Karen, her expression flickering with a trace of worry, before smoothing back into composure. "I'm not accusing anyone, Karen," Thomas finally said softly, though his words carried weight. "I'm just trying to understand how a janitor's daughter spotted what all of us overlooked." Karen gripped her coffee cup, her hand trembling imperceptibly, yet she maintained a cold, slight smile. "Maybe we underestimated her, or maybe it was just luck. But either way, she's caused plenty of trouble for us already." Thomas offered no reply, only a slow nod. He knew pushing Karen for more would accomplish nothing. The doubts in his heart had grown into a need for answers. Answers about the wife and friend he'd once trusted without question. As soon as Karen left the room, Thomas picked up the phone and dialed a close contact in finance, his voice more serious than it had ever been. "Charles, I need you to audit all recent transactions between the company and Brian Miller, especially any transfers offshore. And please, keep this strictly confidential." He set the phone down and leaned back in his high-back leather chair, closing his eyes for a moment. He understood that from this point on his path would be anything but easy. The truth, no matter how painful, had to be faced, even if it meant confronting the most agonizing suspicions about those closest to him. While Thomas's doubts grew ever deeper, in the cramped apartment below, Emma and her mother endured heavy days under the weight of the consequences of her courageous decision. One late afternoon, Emma sat by the small window, gazing at the weak sunlight filtering through the dusty glass, when her old phone buzzed unexpectedly. A message appeared from an unknown number, not saved in her contacts. A few short, cryptic lines. "Emma Carter, this is Daniel Roberts, former finance manager at Harper Enterprises. I know you're right. We need to meet as soon as possible. There's a lot you need to know." Emma froze, palms breaking out in a cold sweat as her heart began to race. She'd heard rumors of Daniel Roberts, a company veteran who had vanished from Harper Enterprises months ago under mysterious circumstances. His name popping up now couldn't be mere coincidence. She hesitated, torn, but her instincts told her this might be her only chance to uncover the full truth. Finally, Emma risked a reply. "I'm willing to meet, but how can I trust you?" Within seconds came the response. "Because we're both targets of Brian Miller. You're not the first he's destroyed." A chill ran down Emma's spine. Brian Miller, the polished, composed man, secretly sowing ruin? The memory of his cold, menacing glare in the boardroom still haunted her nightly, proof enough that he could do such a thing. They arranged to meet at a small cafe tucked away behind bustling streets. Promptly, at the agreed time, Emma walked in and scanned the room. In a secluded corner sat a weary-looking man in his 40s, his sharp eyes fixed on her. "Emma," he said in a hushed, low voice, gesturing to the seat across from him. She sat down and studied him closely. Daniel Roberts appeared gaunt, with deep-set eyes that spoke of countless sleepless nights, yet they gleamed with an uncanny intelligence, a sign of someone well acquainted with Harper Enterprises' darkest secrets. "I was once like you," Daniel began without preamble. "I trusted Brian Miller absolutely until I discovered he was behind a series of mysterious business collapses." Emma's breath caught, her eyes widening in shock. "You mean he's done this before?" Daniel nodded, bitterness lacing his tone. "At least 3 firms fell into the same trap he set for Harper Enterprises. Every contract he drafted contained ambiguous liability clauses that shifted all financial burden onto his partner. When lawsuits erupted, he'd pull out with massive profits while those companies went bankrupt in disgrace." He opened his satchel, removed a thick dossier and slid it across the table. "This is all the evidence I've gathered. Brian's been pulling the strings behind the scenes, erasing his tracks before anyone noticed. He's funneled money through secret offshore accounts, and this time he's even implicated Karen Harper, Thomas's powerful wife." Emma picked up the dossier, flipping through pages, a swirl of fear and anger rising in her chest. The documents laid bare Brian's ruthless, sophisticated scheme. She realized she'd stepped into a much bigger game, facing adversaries capable of anything to protect their secrets. "But why didn't you go to the police?" she asked, voice trembling. Daniel scoffed bitterly, I tried. But Brian has influence over so many powerful people. He had me framed for embezzlement and forced to resign in silence. We can't win by playing by the usual rules." Emma sat in stunned silence, her gaze fixed on the evidence before her, the question in her mind clear. How could she bring this truth to light? "Why me?" Emma finally asked, suspicion clear in her voice. Daniel looked at her earnestly, his tone soft but unwavering. "Because you're the only one brave enough to expose him. You're not afraid of losing your job or facing power. You've already proven the courage I lost long ago." Emma took a deep breath, gripping the dossier tightly as her heart pounded with resolute determination. There was no turning back now. She understood that more than ever. She wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting to protect herself and her mother from people ruthless enough to destroy anyone who stood in their way. Emma stepped out of the little cafe, clutching the dossier Daniel Roberts had just handed her, her emotions a mix of anxiety and resolve. She knew that from this point on, she was no longer fighting alone. Yet the deeper she dug into the truth, the more she felt trapped in a dangerous web far more complex than she'd first imagined. Sleepless nights stretched on for Emma as she sat quietly at her small table, meticulously parsing every detail, every line in the files Daniel had sent. It was on one such night that she suddenly spotted an alarming pattern. Karen Harper's signature and approvals appeared repeatedly, far more often than Brian Miller's. Emma's heart pounded when she realized that Karen was not merely an accomplice. She was at the very center, the true mastermind behind the ruthless plans to seize and sabotage the company. All of the offshore accounts Daniel uncovered bore Karen's signature and direct authorization, while Brian seemed little more than an obedient enforcer. Her hand trembling, Emma flipped through the worn but perfectly legible pages, wondering how a woman with Karen's elegant, flawless exterior could be the architect of such a vicious scheme. Meanwhile, in the grand study of the Harper family's private estate, Thomas sat silently at his desk, weighed down by exhausted thoughts. For days, he had been covertly monitoring every transaction, every phone call, every subtle move tied to Brian and Karen. The mysterious pieces were slowly forming a picture he never wanted to see. Suddenly, the soft click of a closing door in the hallway caught Thomas's attention. He turned to the window overlooking the small garden behind the house. There, under the garden's dim lights, Karen stood close to Brian, their conversation intimate and conspiratorial. Thomas rose, his heart skipping a beat. He edged nearer the window, straining to catch their every gesture. His gaze locked on Karen's face, the woman he had loved wholeheartedly for over 20 years, the woman he'd never imagined capable of betrayal. In the stillness of the night, their words drifted clearly through the slightly open window. "Thomas is starting to get suspicious now, Brian," Karen murmured, her voice soft yet chilling. "We need to move faster if we want this plan to hold together." Brian smirked, replying with his characteristic confidence, "Relax, Karen. Thomas is just a simple man, governed by his emotions. As long as you keep playing the devoted wife perfectly, he won't suspect a thing." Impatient, Karen sighed, her eyes flashing a deadly coldness Thomas had never seen before. "You don't understand. That girl, Emma, has sown seeds of doubt in Thomas's mind. I need you to deal with her, permanently, before she uncovers anything else." Thomas felt his legs buckle at the revelation. The woman he had always considered his soulmate, his trusted partner, was now plotting with Brian to eliminate an innocent young woman simply for exposing their conspiracy. He stumbled back, overwhelmed by pain and betrayal. Everything he'd built, his career, his family, suddenly felt like a facade shielding brazen deception. At that moment, Karen turned, as if sensing a hidden observer. Thomas dove behind the curtain, his heart hammering, breath coming in ragged gasps. He remained in darkness, unable to believe what he had just seen and heard. In his mind appeared Emma's face. That determined young woman with honest eyes who had the courage to stand up for the truth, even when it put her in peril. Regret surged through Thomas. He knew he had to act, to protect Emma, and to expose the truth at any cost. After a few minutes spent gathering himself, Thomas slipped from the room to his private study. He lifted the phone and dialed a longtime friend at the FBI, his voice firm but laden with anguish. "James, I need your help investigating something critical. My wife, Karen Harper, and her partner Brian Miller. I suspect they're plotting to destroy my company, and I fear they might harm an innocent young woman. We need to move now." Hanging up, Thomas sank into his high-backed leather chair, gazing out at the distant nightscape. For the first time in his life, he felt the depths of solitude, betrayed so cruelly by those he loved most. Yet he also knew this: no matter how painful the truth, he had to face it head-on if he hoped to save what remained of his integrity and of his conscience. While Thomas sat alone in the darkened room, struggling to accept the bitter truth about his own family, elsewhere in the city, Emma began to feel the chill breath of danger drawing closer than ever. Early the next morning, before dawn could burn away the mist, Emma's battered phone buzzed repeatedly. She opened a message from an unknown number and felt her heart clamp shut at the short, venomous warning. "It's best if you keep quiet, unless you want your mother to suffer the consequences." Emma's hand trembled as her breath caught. She glanced at her mother, Sophia, still sleeping soundly, worry etched deep into her face from their recent financial strain. Emma forced herself to stay calm, though fear slithered through every muscle, as if someone were watching her every move. Over the following days, the threats kept coming, each message more menacing than the last. Then, Emma began noticing ominous signs of surveillance around their tiny apartment. She'd catch the lingering glance of a stranger across the street, tracking her whenever she left the building. But the moment that terrified Emma most came late one night, after a meeting with Daniel Roberts to collect more documents. She returned home to find her front door slightly ajar. Stepping inside, she saw her mother slumped on the old wooden chair, pale and trembling, unable to speak. "Mom, what's wrong?" Emma cried, rushing forward and kneeling beside her. Sophia looked up with panic in her eyes, her voice a quavering whisper. "Someone came here. A strange man. He warned me that if you don't stop, they'll make us disappear without a trace." Emma wrapped her arms around her mother, her heart constricting. These conspirators weren't bluffing. They meant to carry out the worst threats. In that moment, Emma knew she could not back down. If she yielded now, the truth would die buried, and people like Karen and Brian would continue to ruin innocent lives. She looked into her mother's eyes, her voice steadier than ever. "Mom, I'm sorry you're going through this, but I can't stop, not now. If we let them win, they'll never stop. We have to fight this to the end." Sophia met her daughter's gaze, resolve replacing fear, and nodded softly. "I understand. I'm terrified, but I'm proud of you. If this is the right thing, I'll stand by you." Bolstered by her mother's support, Emma found new courage. That very night, she resolved to gather more evidence against Karen and Brian's scheme. She reached back out to Daniel Roberts, asking for every scrap of detail he could provide about the secret transactions. After persistent effort, Daniel delivered a USB drive containing recordings and emails he'd secretly collected while still at Harper Enterprises. Among them was a crucial conversation between Karen and Brian, undeniable proof of their plot to defraud and sabotage the company. "Emma, be extremely careful," Daniel warned as he handed over the drive. "If they know we have this, they'll do whatever it takes to get it back." Emma nodded firmly, fully aware of the danger, but her determination was firmer still. She would not let fear drown her resolve to pursue justice. That night, huddled in the quiet corner of the local library, Emma reviewed every email and recording on the USB, sweat beading on her palms from tension. Each calculated, cold-blooded phrase from Karen and Brian cut like a jagged blade, revealing how deeply corrupt the people she once trusted could be. Her heart pounded as she listened to Karen's voice on one recording. "If Thomas finds out, we'll pin it all on him. After all, he trusts me completely. He'll be the perfect scapegoat. We just need to stage it perfectly." Emma clenched her eyes shut, fury seething in her chest. Karen had not only betrayed her husband, but was willing to throw Thomas in prison to protect herself. Emma realized she had no choice but to make this evidence public, even if it put her and her mother at even greater risk. She gripped the USB drive tightly and vowed to herself that she would never bow to threats. This fight had outgrown a single person. It was now a battle for truth, for justice, and for everyone damaged by the boundless greed of Karen Harper and Brian Miller. Taking a deep breath, Emma felt her purpose crystallize. No matter the peril, she would stand her ground and see this fight through, convinced that in the end the truth would prevail. While Emma quietly resolved to pursue the truth despite the increasingly grave threats, Thomas was enduring his own inner tempest at the Harper Enterprises office. He could not stop replaying the cold look in his wife Karen's eyes, or Brian's terrifyingly casual tone as they conspired against him in his own garden. The evidence he'd gathered from suspicious financial transactions, along with Emma's warning, was now undeniable. He faced a decision he never imagined having to make. Never in his life had Thomas felt so alone. His wife of more than 20 years and his closest friend were now secretly working against him. After a sleepless night of turmoil, Thomas picked up the phone and called the renowned attorney Victoria Reed, famous for her battles against powerful, corrupt corporations. His voice was grave but resolute. "Ms. Reed, this is Thomas Harper. I need your help immediately. My company is in grave danger, and I have conclusive proof that my wife, Karen Harper, and my partner, Brian Miller, are plotting to destroy Harper Enterprises from within." After that weighty call, Victoria agreed to meet him right away at her downtown law offices. That afternoon, Thomas entered Victoria Reed's office looking troubled. Victoria, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s with a resolute demeanor, greeted him with a firm handshake and sympathetic glance. "Thomas, once we embark on this fight, there's no turning back," she warned. "Everything will be exposed publicly, and your company could suffer severe repercussions." Thomas nodded firmly. "I understand, but this is no longer just about me. It's about truth and justice, and about a brave young woman named Emma Carter, who is at risk for speaking out against powerful people like Karen and Brian. I cannot let her fight alone." Victoria looked him in the eye and nodded with respect. "Then let's begin." Just days later, an unprecedented press conference was held at Harper Enterprises headquarters. The media swarmed in, cameras trained on Thomas as he mounted the podium, his gaze unwavering yet etched with profound pain. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas began, voice strong and decisive, "I stand before you today not to announce new successes or record profits for Harper Enterprises. I am here to speak about something far more important: truth." The room fell silent. Every eye was on the typically reserved CEO. In recent weeks, I discovered that those I trusted most were the very people conspiring to sabotage this company, Thomas continued, locking eyes with the cameras. Karen Harper, my wife, and Brian Miller, my longtime partner, secretly planned to shift dangerous legal liabilities onto Harper Enterprises for their own gain. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the crowd as flashbulbs popped. Thomas pressed on with steady resolve. I also want to publicly acknowledge and thank a courageous young woman, Emma Carter. Though she is just a custodian, she saw what the rest of us missed or chose to ignore. I owe her my deepest apology and gratitude. Surprised and admiring chatter filled the room. Thomas paused, took a deep breath, then declared, "Today, I pledge to cooperate fully with the authorities, with attorney Victoria Reed, and with anyone else necessary to bring the entire truth to light. No matter the consequences, Harper Enterprises will never compromise with deceit and corruption." He concluded amid stunned silence before the media erupted with questions. Thomas walked briskly from the podium, feeling an unexpected lightness. He had chosen truth and justice, just as Emma had bravely done. Meanwhile, in Brian Miller's office, Brian slammed his fist on the desk in rage, his face flushed. Karen stood beside him, her complexion ashen, panic in her eyes. "Brian, didn't you say Thomas would never have the nerve to confront us?" Karen hissed, her voice trembling. Brian ground his teeth, eyes icy as they flicked to the television replaying Thomas's revelations. "I underestimated him," Brian admitted. "But this isn't over, Karen. If he thinks he can defeat us so easily, he's gravely mistaken." He picked up the phone, voice as cold as steel. "Get Plan B in motion immediately, and remember, there can be no more mistakes." As a new storm gathered, Emma watched the broadcast in her tiny apartment, tears slipping down her cheeks, the first since this ordeal began. She saw Thomas on the screen, resolute and sincere, and for the first time she felt she was not alone in the fight for the truth. Emma knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger and hardship, but from this moment on she was certain of one thing. No matter how difficult the struggle, truth would ultimately prevail. As Emma felt a rare sense of relief from Thomas Harper's public support, she quickly realized the conspirators would not accept defeat easily. Karen Harper and Brian Miller immediately launched a fierce counterattack, determined to crush anyone who dared oppose them. Just days after the press conference, a barrage of negative headlines began circulating across social media and news outlets. Sensationalist stories distorted the facts to smear Thomas's reputation. Harper Enterprises, CEO accused of abuse of power, framing wife and partner to hide, personal misconduct. Is Thomas Harper exploiting custodian Emma Carter to mask a massive financial scandal? These malicious articles rapidly caught the public's attention, unleashing a torrent of criticism against Thomas and Emma. On social media, Emma was branded everything from liar to gold digger, making her life increasingly unbearable. Even more painful, one morning she received a notice from her school. An anonymous complaint had been filed accusing her of academic dishonesty, demanding her temporary suspension until the allegations could be investigated. Emma sat motionless on her bed, trembling as she clutched the letter, tears of helplessness and anger welling up. Karen and Brian weren't just destroying her reputation, they were deliberately sabotaging her educational future, something she had worked so hard to protect. Amid these storms, Thomas faced severe blows as well. Shareholders began losing faith, demanding his resignation or the retraction of his accusations, or they would pull their investments en masse, driving the company to the brink of collapse. One late afternoon, Thomas met privately with Emma at a small cafe. He looked exhausted, but his eyes remained resolute. "Emma, I'm so sorry to have dragged you into this," he said. "But we can't back down now. Karen and Brian are using every tactic to force us to abandon this fight. I need you to stay strong." Emma met his gaze, determination shining in her eyes. "I will never back down. No matter what they do, I won't let them win." Bolstered by that resolve, Emma quietly began planning to gather concrete evidence against Karen and Brian's ruthless counterattack. After days of subtle observation, she discovered that Karen and Brian were meeting in secret at an upscale restaurant hidden in a quiet part of town. One late night, Emma decided to take a risk. She disguised herself and carried only her small phone. Posing as a newly hired server, she entered the restaurant. Her heart pounded as she spotted Karen and Brian at a private table, their faces tense as they plotted their next move. Emma pretended to approach their table to serve them, her hands shaking as she switched on her phone's hidden recording mode. Karen's cold voice rang out clearly in the audio. "We need to ramp up our media campaign. The more people believe Thomas and that Emma Carter are liars, the easier it will be to bring them down. I want her future destroyed completely, so no one else dares follow her example." Brian nodded in cruel agreement. "I've already sent that anonymous complaint to her school. Just a few more steps and Emma won't have any future left to protect." Emma gripped her phone tightly, fury surging through her. Though she wanted to expose them immediately, she knew she had to remain calm and patient. Only when her evidence was airtight could she fully dismantle Karen and Brian's plot. After recording the conversation, Emma slipped away quietly, her heart racing. As she exited the restaurant, she caught a server's suspicious glance and quickly moved on. All the way home, she kept glancing over her shoulder, afraid she'd been spotted. Once safely inside her apartment, Emma sent the recording to attorney Victoria Reed and to Thomas immediately. Victoria called her that same night, her voice urgent. "Emma, this is critical evidence. With what you've just captured, we can petition the authorities to launch an official investigation. But from now on, you must be extremely careful. Karen and Brian will react violently if they discover we have this recording." Emma took a deep breath, replying with steadfast resolve. "I understand. But no matter what they do, I will never back down. The truth must be exposed, whatever the cost." After the call, Emma sat down, her fear replaced by fierce determination. She knew the road ahead was fraught with danger, but she now held the most powerful weapon, irrefutable proof of the truth, something Karen and Brian could no longer deny. Though the conspirators' counteroffensive continued, Emma was certain of one thing. In the end, justice would prevail. And this time, she would stand firm to protect the truth, no matter what. Finally, the day of the trial arrived, carrying the weight of truth and justice that Emma and Thomas Harper had fought so hard to uphold. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall courtroom windows, casting a tense glow over the crowded chamber. Seated quietly in the witness stand, Emma felt every pair of eyes fixed on her. Karen Harper and Brian Miller sat at the defendant's table, their faces calm to the point of coldness, though flashes of barely concealed anger crossed Karen's expression now and then. Emma knew this was her most critical opportunity to bring the truth to light. When her name was called, Emma rose and walked steadily to the stand, her heart pounding. Before her sat rows of journalists, members of the public, and, most intimidating of all, Brian's sharp, calculating attorney, Jonathan Clark, renowned for his ruthless cross-examinations. "Emma Carter," Jonathan began, his tone cutting. "Do you really expect this court to believe that a 16-year-old custodian with no legal training could have uncovered such a complex conspiracy as you claim?" Emma looked him squarely in the eye, her voice calm and firm. "Sir, you don't have to be a lawyer to tell truth from lies. I stumbled upon the dangerous clause in that contract, and I spoke up because it was the right thing to do. Truth doesn't depend on age or job title." Jonathan sneered, pressing on. "But isn't it true you benefited directly from your relationship with CEO Thomas Harper? How can the court be sure you didn't collude with him to cover up financial wrongdoing?" Emma drew a deep breath, her voice ringing clear. "I have never received any benefit from Mr. Harper. In fact, my mother and I lost our livelihood because I stood up for the truth. If I wanted personal gain, I wouldn't have put myself at such risk." A hush fell over the courtroom. Emma caught sympathetic looks from the judges and those watching the trial. She glanced toward Thomas and saw his grateful, encouraging expression. Next, Thomas Harper took the stand. He approached with a solemn, determined mien. Jonathan immediately attacked his past lapses. "Mr. Harper, didn't you allow your wife and your closest partner to operate unchecked for far too long? Isn't your own negligence the root cause of this scandal?" Thomas remained unshaken, responding with honesty and strength. "I admit I made a grave mistake in trusting Karen and Brian blindly, but my greatest mistake was not listening sooner to Emma Carter, the only person brave enough to expose this plot from the start. Today, I stand here to correct that error no matter the consequences." He turned his gaze to Karen and Brian, his voice steely. "I have incontrovertible evidence that Karen Harper and Brian Miller deliberately inserted those opaque legal clauses to shift all liability onto the company, while embezzling millions through offshore accounts. I will no longer stay silent in the face of such actions." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath at Thomas's clear, resolute statements. Karen struggled to conceal rising panic. Brian clenched his fists, his eyes cold. Then, Attorney Victoria Reed presented Emma's secret recording from the restaurant. The room erupted in stunned silence as Karen and Brian's cruel words echoed through the speakers. "I want to ensure that her future is completely destroyed." That heavy silence felt like a verdict. For the first time, Jonathan Clark faltered, unable to dispute the recording's authenticity or weight. Before adjourning, the judge fixed Karen and Brian with a stern gaze and issued a final warning. "The court finds there is ample evidence of serious wrongdoing by the defendants. We will continue to review the matter thoroughly, but you should prepare yourselves for the full legal consequences." Karen trembled, her fear laid bare. Brian maintained a tough facade, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. As Emma stepped from the courtroom, she felt as though a tremendous burden had been lifted. She found Thomas standing beside Victoria Reed, his face weary but at peace. "We're about to win," Thomas said softly, gratitude in his voice. "Thank you, Emma, for having the courage to do what no one else would." Emma smiled softly. She knew the battle was not yet over, but after today's progress, justice truly seemed to be on their side. No matter how fiercely Karen and Brian fought back, they could no longer hide from a truth now shining brighter than ever. When the trial resumed after the break, the tension in the courtroom was more palpable than ever. Karen Harper and Brian Miller sat at the defense table, their faces betraying stress and unease, so different from their usual composure and confidence. Every eye in the room was fixed on these once powerful figures, now utterly exposed by irrefutable evidence. On the witness bench, Emma sat quietly. Her earlier nerves had given way to a fierce faith in justice. Beside her, Thomas Harper stood with attorney Victoria Reed, his expression solemn and determined, his gaze locked on Karen and Brian. The judge rapped his gavel lightly and asked defense counsel for their final arguments. Jonathan Clark rose and tried desperately to mitigate Karen's and Brian's responsibility, but each of his points was dismantled by the sharp evidence Emma and Victoria had presented. Finally, unable to contain herself, Karen suddenly stood. The entire courtroom fell silent in astonishment as her face, contorted with panic and despair, spoke the confession everyone had been waiting for. "That's enough. I can't keep lying," she cried. "Yes, it was my plan. I only wanted to push the deal through quickly, to rake in huge commissions and secret financial transactions with Brian. I never imagined it would be exposed like this." Her desperate, bitter admission echoed through the courtroom, leaving everyone speechless. Brian leaped to his feet, fury reddening his eyes, and shouted at Karen, "Are you insane, Karen? How dare you betray me like this? You were the one who orchestrated everything. I was only following your plan." The spectacle of the two co-conspirators blaming each other in front of the judge and jury stunned the room. Karen wheeled on Brian, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "Shut up, Brian. If it weren't for your boundless greed, I never would have been drawn into this. You're the one who ruined everything." The judge pounded his gavel to restore order, but the intense confrontation had already laid bare the full, undeniable scope of Karen's and Brian's malicious conspiracy. Victoria Reed rose, her voice clear and forceful. "Your Honor, Karen Harper's confession, combined with the indisputable evidence we have presented, confirms beyond doubt that Karen Harper and Brian Miller intentionally devised a sophisticated fraud scheme to enrich themselves at the expense of Harper Enterprises. I respectfully ask this court to hand down the appropriate sentencing." A heavy silence settled over the courtroom. The judge regarded Karen and Brian with unprecedented severity before delivering his verdict. The court finds Karen Harper and Brian Miller guilty of fraud, intentional manipulation, and embezzlement of company assets. Their actions have caused significant financial harm and severely undermined public trust in this business. Accordingly, each defendant is sentenced to 10 years in prison. Brian collapsed back into his chair, utterly broken. His former calm and confidence vanished. Karen remained standing, her face ghostly pale, eyes wide and hollow, unable to accept that she had destroyed everything she once held dear. As the hearing ended, security officers escorted Karen and Brian from the courtroom. Passing Emma and Thomas, Karen whirled on Emma, hatred in her eyes. "Happy now, Emma Carter. You ruined my life." Emma said nothing, meeting Karen's glare with a steady, resolute look. She knew it was not she who had destroyed Karen's life, but Karen's own greed and selfishness. Once the door closed behind Karen and Brian, Thomas stepped to Emma's side and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his gratitude plain. "It's finally over. I don't know how to thank you, Emma. Without your courage and persistence, this truth would have remained buried." Emma offered a small smile, feeling lighter than she had in months. The journey had been painful and arduous, but she had always believed justice would prevail. As they walked out of the courtroom, the late afternoon sun bathed them in warm light, heralding a new beginning. Emma knew there was still much work to do to rebuild trust and move forward, but at least she had brought the truth to light and seen the villains finally face the consequences of their actions. As the courtroom doors closed behind them, Emma and Thomas Harper stepped into the brilliant golden sunshine of a hopeful summer afternoon. After days of storm and strife, they both felt an immense weight lift from their shoulders. Though there was still much work ahead, today marked the moment when truth had fully prevailed. Over the following weeks, Harper Enterprises faced challenging but also inspiring times. Determined and deeply changed by recent events, Thomas Harper moved swiftly to rebuild the company's reputation and restore trust. He dismissed everyone who had enabled Karen's and Brian's scheme, then invited attorney Victoria Reed to join the executive team to ensure the company would operate on a foundation of transparency, integrity, and justice. One clear morning, Thomas summoned all employees to the grand atrium of Harper Enterprises headquarters for a company-wide announcement. Standing before hundreds of staff, his eyes shone with unwavering resolve as he declared, "From this moment on, Harper Enterprises will never again tolerate corruption or deceit in any form. We will rebuild on our core values, honesty, courage, and social responsibility. I promise you, every decision we make will honor these principles, so the company not only recovers, but emerges stronger than ever." Thunderous applause filled the atrium as hopeful faces turned toward the CEO, who had been so profoundly transformed by the recent crisis. During the event, Thomas paused and addressed Emma directly, his gratitude clear in his smile. "I want to extend a special thank you to the person whose courage and integrity made all of this possible. Emma Carter is not just a hero of Harper Enterprises. She is a symbol of truth and justice." Emma stepped onto the podium to a sustained standing ovation. Her heart raced and her cheeks warmed with emotion. Thomas looked at her kindly and added in a warm, proud tone, "To express our deepest gratitude, Harper Enterprises is awarding Emma a full scholarship to the prestigious Harvard University, so she can pursue any dream she chooses." Emma stood in stunned silence for a moment, tears glistening in her eyes. This was a dream she had held for years, but never believed could come true, especially under these circumstances. She approached Thomas, accepted the honorary scholarship plaque from his hand, and spoke with a steady, heartfelt voice. "Thank you so much, Mr. Harper, and thank you all for believing in me. I will never forget the lesson I've learned on this journey. It takes real courage to do what's right, no matter how difficult it may be. I promise to carry these values with me for the rest of my life." The room erupted in applause louder than ever before. Emma, the young woman who had once been just a custodian, now stood before them as a shining example of bravery and justice, inspiring everyone who heard her extraordinary story. In the months that followed, Harper Enterprises underwent a remarkable transformation, becoming a model of healthy corporate culture and social responsibility. Thomas Harper not only overhauled the company internally, but also actively engaged in anti-corruption campaigns and public education on corporate ethics. Meanwhile, Emma embarked on her new life at Harvard, carrying with her the confidence and courage forged through her trials. Her story spread quickly, becoming a priceless inspiration for countless young people fighting for justice and truth. One late afternoon, Thomas visited Emma on campus. They sat together on the lush green lawn, watching the sunset over the university. With heartfelt emotion, Thomas said, "Emma, if it weren't for you, I might still be lost in a world of lies and ambition. You saved not only Harper Enterprises, but also saved me. I will be forever grateful." Emma smiled softly, gazing at the horizon with a contented heart. "Mr. Harper, I only did what was right. I believe anyone can do the same, if they have the courage to speak up." Thomas nodded, his eyes full of conviction. "You're right, Emma. It is the courage of people like you that truly makes the world a better place. I vow never to forget this lesson." They sat in peaceful silence for a long moment, savoring rare tranquility, their spirits light and joyful. They had proven something invaluable. No matter how many hardships and challenges they faced, justice and truth would always win. And as the brilliant sunset bathed them in its glow, they look to the future with renewed hope, strong and unwavering. Thank you for following Emma Carter's extraordinary journey, the young woman who bravely stood up for truth and justice. Her story reminds us that no matter who you are or what your role is, if you have the courage to speak up, you can change the world. What do you think of Emma's courageous actions? If you were in her place, would you dare to speak out despite the risks? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share this video to spread a powerful message about honesty and bravery. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring stories. Goodbye, and see you next time.